Good evening. It is Wednesday, April 21st. Before we get started, a very quick, exciting announcement. Our first in person event, people have been asking, when are we going to have an event? When are we going to have an event? Our first one is this Saturday, April 24th, from 6:30 to 8:30. It will be at Aviate or Wichita Sports Forum, whatever you want to call it. I have sent out a parent email. I will as well with the address and things if you've never been to Aviate or Sports Forum, whatever you want to call it again. Teens will be allowed to play sand volleyball. I have reserved a sand volleyball court, and they will also have access to the trampoline park. I would say please drop off and pick up at Aviate. Teens will need to eat dinner before they come. They will need a mask to enter the building. And in the email, there is a little button available that says Aviate waiver form. If you could click on that and sign your kids in if they are planning on coming, that just makes the check-in run more smoothly, so I'm not trying to do it myself. The cost is free. It is free that night. I just wanted us to be able to hang out together and just be able to spend time with one another, do something fun. And so I hope that everyone will join us this Saturday night. And then as well, joining us Sunday morning in our in-person Bible class. So tonight, with our online, family lessons, we are wrapping up our series on faith, kind of faith amongst the chaos. And tonight, we're talking about loneliness. If you think about friendships and relationships, those are a big deal in our culture. You've got to have your close personal friends. It's no longer on Netflix. It is on HBO Max, I believe. But it's interesting to me how many young people, even in our youth group, love watching the 90s sitcom Friends. Now, it's not my favorite show. I don't mind watching it. Hopefully you don't turn the video off because I said I didn't like Friends. I should also warn you, I'm not a big Seinfeld fan either. Sorry, I know I've probably lost a lot of respect there. I do think amongst our society why Friends is so appealing, though, and I've done some research on it, but if you think about it, back in the 90s when Friends was on the air, it was simpler times. There were no cell phones. There was no internet. It was just everybody hanging out on this orange couch in a coffee shop. It's an experience that we wish we had. In fact, one of the authors, Vaughn Roberts, of stuff that I've studied, it says, Friends, the sitcom featuring 6 people in their 20s living in New York, attracted huge audiences when it first aired from the mid-1990s and is still shown almost continuously on satellite channels throughout the world. What explains this phenomenal success? Perhaps the answer is found in the title of its theme song, I'll Be There For You. Those words capture the dreams of a generation. David Schwimmer, an actor who played as Ross on the show, has commented, it's a fantasy for a lot of people having a group of friends who become like family. And then she goes on to say, for many, that's all it is, a fantasy. 20% of adults admit to feeling lonely at any time, and the same percentage say they have no friend with whom to discuss a personal problem. Commenting on this widespread sense of isolation, Mother Teresa, who spent her life working with destitute people in Calcutta, said it's the worst disease. It's not leprosy, it's not AIDS, it's not cancer, but it's loneliness. In fact, I didn't know this, but Great Britain has recently appointed a government position called the Minister of Loneliness. And loneliness is a major problem among young people today. It's not the absence of having people in our lives, but the absence of meaningful relationships. And you can find loneliness addressed all throughout the Bible. The first time we see it is in Genesis chapter 2, and God's talking about it's not good for man to be alone. God's plan for humanity was one of relational fullness and inclusion, but sin, of course, brought distance and isolation. Adam and Eve, when they realized that they were sinning, they were shameful and they went and hid. You have the breakdown of relationships, and the rest of the Bible tells a story of God seeking to reconcile us to himself and to one another. And we can know all these ideas but still feel alone. We can feel disconnected. We wonder at times if we have any real friends. And even God can feel distant from us at times. So what are some realities that make friendships difficult? Well, you have the sins of other people who want to leave us out. We have our own sin, whether we've messed up or we've offended people or we cause people to no longer trust us. And I think when we're aware that people are disappointed in us, there is more loneliness. We have expectations for relationships, but we don't really know what to do when we get together. There's another author named Sherry Turkle who calls this being alone together. Like, we live in the most technologically connected age in the history of civilization, yet rates of loneliness have doubled since the 1980s. And then there's a fact that friendship is hard work. And we're trained by our culture, by our society, that if something is difficult or if something doesn't necessarily feel rewarding, then it's broken. You think about the famous Greek philosopher Aristotle, who says the desire for friendship comes quickly, friendship does not. So tonight, where we're going to be is in Mark chapter 1. I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version here in just a second. Feel free to follow along in whatever translation you're most comfortable with. But tonight, I'm not going to address all the practicals of friendships and relationships, but I do want to speak to the heart of loneliness. And this is a story that involves Jesus. And in this passage, in Mark chapter 1, starting in verse 40, we witness Jesus encountering someone who had gotten used to being avoided and left alone until Jesus did the unthinkable. So starting in verse 40 of Mark chapter 1, it says, "And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling, said to him, 'If you will, you can make me clean.' Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, 'I will be clean.' And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. And Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once, and said to him, 'See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them.' But he went out and began to talk freely about it, and to spread the news, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places, and people were coming to him from every corner." Leprosy in the Bible is described as a variety of chronic skin diseases. But if you notice what this man says, he asked Jesus, he says, "You can make me clean, not you can make me well." And Jesus responds, "I will be clean." But notice he doesn't say be healed. And I've always wondered why. What does this mean? Why is this described in terms of dirty or unclean and clean rather than sickness and health? And it's because someone with leprosy was not just considered necessarily to have a health problem, but to be unclean in the community of God's people. And this goes back to Leviticus chapter 13. Leviticus 13, verse 45 and 46 says, "The leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes, and let the hair of his head hang loose, and he shall cover his upper lip and cry out, 'Unclean, unclean.' He shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. Can you imagine what this kind of experience would look like? You're socially isolated. You're an outcast. You're a stigma. You're living away from camp basically with the rest of the trash. And there is a relationship between being unclean and being alone. People are told, get out of here, leave us alone, go away. They know what this is like. And so have you ever felt unclean? Where life becomes complicated and people don't really know how to manage that complication. So they retreat from you because they feel like you've gotten weird on them. Or you're going through maybe a time of suffering and maybe you feel like no one else understands. And so you feel lonely in your pain. Maybe you struggle with your appearance. Maybe you struggle with relational skills. Maybe you struggle with interacting in certain environments that makes you uncomfortable. Maybe you're constantly managing in your head whether or not people really want to be around you or if they're just kind of putting up with you. Maybe you've gone through a breakup. Maybe you've liked someone and they don't feel the same way about you, so you feel unwanted. There can be feelings of shame. There can be feelings of rejection. There can be feelings and experiences of loneliness that can just make you feel worthless. Or sometimes a feeling of worthlessness can cause you to withdraw from people. Maybe you feel like you're not really known and you're not really sure how or what to do to be known. So maybe you never experience real intimacy because you feel like you always need to wear a mask. You can't really be yourself. You might be thinking, what is there to even know about me? Maybe you feel like a nobody. But here's the thing, nobodies are exactly the kind of people that Jesus wants to be around. This guy says, if you're willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus answers, I will be clean. Jesus wants people like you and me. Notice what happens next in verse 41. It says, move with pity. So Jesus had compassion for this man. He stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, I will be clean. The word compassion means literally to suffer with. And what blows me away, and kind of the point I'm making for tonight, is Jesus could have healed this man by just saying, be healed. But instead, he chooses this deeply personal way, and he touches him. This intimate contact, this show of action. And in that culture, it's shocking because you don't touch unclean people. It's like Jesus touched him at the very place of shame. This is the God of Israel. This is the God of the universe coming closer than you'd ever expect or imagine. A Christian author by the name of Ed Welch said, this is the gospel. God touches us. All talk about cleanness and uncleanness points to this divine touch. This is what the universe itself was waiting for. It's an unbalanced transaction that displaces our shame and replaces it with holiness. God restores us to himself and to one another. And then Jesus tells this man, show yourself to the priest. Because this is what would allow him to re-enter society, to go home again and be with his family. In the Old Testament, to touch a leper would make you considered unclean. And Jesus' touch heals him. But if you were paying attention to the story, it also takes something away from Jesus. Jesus does not only come near the lonely man, this unclean, this shameful man, but Jesus bears what we experience. In verses 43 and 45, it says, and Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once, and said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them." But he went out and began to talk freely about it and spread the news so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places. So this man shares his experience, doing the opposite of what Jesus asked. He spreads news about him, but it's positive news. It's the good kind of gossip, and maybe it's just out of pure excitement and joy at being healed. Maybe because he wants to come back in town with this impressive story to tell. We don't know. But if you notice what happens, Jesus now ends up in desolate places as a result. His preaching ministry in the synagogues in Galilee, that's shut down because the rulers want to arrest him. The crowds want to use him, and now he has to go into the wilderness. Jesus knew loneliness. He was described as a man of sorrows. He's rejected by his own family. In his greatest moment of need, he's abandoned by his disciples. And in love, he took that loneliness and that shame that we experience. And in Psalm 69, I think Michael pointed this during the lesson on Sunday. But in Psalm 69, verse 7 and 9, it says, "For it is for your sake that I have borne reproach, that dishonor has covered my face. I've become a stranger to my brothers, an alien to my mother's sons, for zeal for your house has consumed me, and the reproaches of those who reproach you have fallen on me." Jesus took our loneliness in a much more significant sense. He's described in the Bible as suffering outside of the camp in Hebrews 13, verse 12. But he's suffering away from the city, hanging on a cross. He cried out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" He knew what it was like to be left alone, so that we could never be left alone, and he's with us now. Now, here's the thing. I can't fix all of your friendships or family problems. There is wisdom available for these needs, and I'd be happy to talk to you about any of these things. But the most important thing that I want to do is to point you to the one who knows this experience through and through, and who is with you to the very end of the age. And that's Jesus. And I hope that you guys as a family take that step this week as you continue, hopefully, these questions and answering these questions and just getting closer together as a family, because that's really what these Wednesday nights are for. Again, thank you so much for watching, for participating. It's been a true blessing to make these, and I'll see you guys next week.